Okay.
Okay, let's all behave. So I just want to share again some ideas as we get ready for Pesach. I know it's not Rosh Chodesh yet, but Rosh Chodesh is Shabbos. We have Erica Brown is here this Shabbos. We're gonna have a fantastic Shabbos, and then that's it. You have 14 days from Shabbos, but the Pesach starts Friday night, so you really have a week to like get stuff together. Then you have another week to like put it together, and then you have a week to celebrate. So the summer is basically over. So so I'm gonna put up my stuff on the screen, and we'll go through it. I just kind of single out a couple of things. You see that? Everybody sees it? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Great. So this came from, again, I read a lot of Haggadahs. I started already on Pesach time looking at Haggadahs and stuff. On Pesach, I'm before Purim, Pesach time. Before Purim, looking at Haggadah. So this is from Hagaddah. It's actually now finally available on Amazon if you want. But Rabbi David Millstone, he is the head of the Midrashah in Israel called Midreshet Harova, which is a girls' seminary, a post-gap year high school for girls program in the Old City. My daughter went there a few years ago, but I've been following. I've been reading his Torah for years. He has 5 books on Chumash, and he has books on Navi. So he finally put out a Haggadah, and I just have a couple of selections from here, which are really, really good. But again, it's available on Amazon. And I also want to point out is that I spoke to Rabbi Alex Israel last week, right after a shiur, and I sent him the video. I told him, I said, I hope I got you some more subscribers to your email list. And he was so happy. He says, I love when people, teach things that I write. He said it means a lot. And I know that when people quote you, it's a big deal. So here, so I just, no particular order. I just kind of was going through a lot of things. I thought things that perhaps you could glean from and maybe perhaps even use at your own Siddharim. So the prerequisite before Magid, the Seder plate. So most Haggadahs, the way they have it set up is they have a whole section about koshering and preparing and how to set up the Seder plate. And usually, they have the same 4 pictures of how to set up the Seder plate, none of which is the same, of course. You set up the Seder plate based on the Seder plate that you happen to have and the one that you use. And wherever it says you put there, and you're always confused, like, wait, it says Chazeret and Maror. Like, do I do both? Do I not? I mean, the Seder plate is kind of it's this symbolic item. And I know people that actually will have singular Seder plates for everyone. So that's interesting also. So here, prerequisite before Magid. Here we go. The Seder plate is a common wedding present. Okay. Has anyone ever given a Seder plate as a wedding present? I got one. I think we still use it. We still use it. Yeah. I got a couple. We still use it. It spends the majority of the year locked away with the other Pesach utensils, but on the first night of Pesach, it holds center stage on our beautifully adorned table. We will not delve into the customs and rationales of the order of the items on the plate, the Minig Arizal, the Ramah, the Gra, to name but 3, but we'll try to understand the plate's overall message. So there, right away, everybody, when we talk about the Seder plate, everybody kind of obsesses over what goes where and who does what, how, who, ha. But we're not going to focus on that. We're going to take, again, what I always call a macro look. As we know, each item on the plate symbolizes a fundamental part of the evening. The egg is symbolic of the carbon chagiga, offered up together with the carbon Pesach. They are placed side by side in all 3 of the minhagim because they complement each other. If I was doing the grammar, I would say they complement one another, but that's me. The maror, normally lettuce and or horseradish, reflects the pain of the Jewish people suffering in slavery. The ideal form of maror is actually lettuce because its bitterness is gradual, as opposed to the immediate sense of heat one feels when biting into horseradish. The slavery in Egypt did not happen in one go. It was a planned process of progressive oppression over many years, and this is more effectively reflected by the lettuce. Just parenthetically, first of all, Rob Millstone is British, so when you say things like in one go, that's because he's British. Second of all, when we studied Arvei Pesachim and we did the sugya on maror, the Gemara lists several items which are acceptable for maror, and we always associate maror with sharpness, but it's not. It's actually bitterness. And it's probably more likely even the stalks of the lettuce. So what we did is we actually had a taste test. I brought out all the items that that are acceptable for Mora that I was able to find, including leeks, fenugreek, things like that. And we actually had a taste test in our Shiur. I had a whole tray set up. It was really very exciting, when you have that type of experiential learning. So then you have the charoset, although sweet, symbolizes the cement used by our forefathers in Egypt. The karpas, chazeret, and salt water are there for dipping purposes. Charoset is also interesting. There was a book that came out last year about the history of charoset. Really fascinating book, going through different cultures and different types of things. And of course, I'm sure everybody in their respective homes has different custom for charoset. Yours is sweet. Yours is use this. We have in our house, of course, in today's world, which you have to be, we offer the nut-free version because we have some nut allergic kids, and we have the nut-full version. We also keep nuts in the house, even though I have kids allergic to it, but that's a whole conversation for the psychologist. And by the way, if you have kids who are allergic to nuts, Pesach is very, very challenging because a lot of items have nuts in them. You have to be mindful of that. Just a little PSA. Okay, there's an obvious problem here. However big our Seder plate is, this is generally not an evening we eat alone. Most families have the custom of celebrating the Seder night with extended families and invited guests. As the Hagaddah declares at the very onset of the evening, whoever is hungry, let him come and eat. Whoever is in need, let him come and celebrate the Pesach. Add that to the halachically required amounts of matzah and maror, and the Seder plate is obviously inadequate to accommodate all we need to eat, even if you place more than one on the table. So it's symbolic. In other words, you have these little, remember you have the Seder with the little cups. They usually have like little cups that go in it, or some people put it directly on the plate, and you try. How do you get a piece of lettuce in one of those little cups? You just kind of, and it like overlaps with the horseradish, and it takes over the egg, and the egg nebuch just sits there, and you roast it, and it's dark, and you're like, well, what do I do with the poor thing, right? Where do I put the egg? Where do I even, just it's like such a nebuch, the egg. People actually eat it, by the way. Just letting you know. So, in addition, I remember being perplexed by my grandfather's Sephardi minhag, and he has it here in the note. See, he writes that even though he's Ashkenazi, his mother was brought up in Jib, as they call it, and his maternal grandfather was a very big part of his life, of holding the Seder plate over each of our heads while repeating the phrase, "We left Egypt in haste," Bechi Pazon. This act indicated that the Seder plate was not there for practical reasons. It obviously represented something far more important. So what is that something? Perhaps we can suggest that the Seder plate reflects Am Yisrael's ongoing reality. We are not just commemorating freedom from Egypt or the start of our independence as a people. We are celebrating being Am Yisrael. Our nation is not just about the matzah of freedom, but about the bitterness of maror, the servitude of charoses, and the questioning represented by the dipping. As we begin Magid, as we prepare to enter this eternal covenant with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we are reminded that our relationship with God is mutually unconditional. We will not celebrate our Judaism only when things go the way we want. We will be the people of God in the bad times too, which I think that, I don't want to, I'm trying this year to really move away from COVID. Like my theme for Shabbos Hagadol, for the men's Seder, it's all like a post-COVID theme of like coming out of the darkness, of emerging from our last 2 years of slavery, however it might be, and how do we move forward? Not to say that it's not present and it's not a part of our lives, but I don't want to be like mired in all the negativity and all that, being closed in. I want to open up. So we have to, and we certainly understood what it meant to serve God in bad times and troubling times. So we are with HaKadosh Baruch Hu always. The Seder plate represents that ongoing reality of being Jewish. Maybe this is why we have the Hillel sandwich later on in the evening. Hillel understood that to truly celebrate matzah, we have to eat it together with the carbon Pesach and the maror. We must learn that to eat Pesach, matzah, and maror together as one, the good with the bad, the redemption with the exile, the defeats with the victories. Any relationship that can only work when the going is good is empty of any real substance. So you can make any number of references, of associations with this. I'll give you a very innocuous example, but I spend a lot of time now engaged in sports because now that I have a 6-year-old, almost 7-year-old son who's like mishugana about sports, Baruch Hashem, I have to tell him that you root for your team even when they stink. You can't just root for the good teams. You can't just or support your team when they're doing well. Yeah, we have a hard time when they struggle. And being a New York fan over the years, we struggled a lot. But you have to be, and it's a good life lesson, by the way, is that you stick with your people, you stick with your family, you stick with your tradition, no matter how challenging it might be. But that's what I think it's such an important line, that any relationship that can only work when the going is good is empty of any real substance. And remarkably, indeed, over the last 2,000 years, Am Yisrael have sat down to Seder night during crusades, pogroms, on the eve of the Warsaw Ghetto uprising, and incredulously in the Auschwitz-Birkenau death camp. For generations, we have sat together celebrating our redemption while simultaneously living through death and destruction. Can there be any greater reflection of our covenant with the commitment to the Almighty? This evening is about the freedom of a nation to serve the Almighty at all times, in all countries, whatever the circumstances. Once that redemption occurred and we became God's people, the possibility of complete slavery was eternally removed from our historical agenda. That is our celebration tonight. Our true redemption and hence our rejoicing is beyond physical freedom. It can never be marred by temporary tragedies and complexities. Wherever we are, whatever our predicament, we are the nation of God and we carry his Torah. That is our reason for being and our eternal freedom. No one can take that away from us. So it's a moment where, if you want to take a moment sort of before the Seder even begins, by the way, you have to be mindful of this. You can't be careful. It's very easy to get bogged down in like conversations and Torahs and Torahs and everything before you even start. You'll find yourselves behind the 8 ball rather quickly. Especially Dolores is only going to be having one Seder, so she has to make sure to really maximize her time at the Seder. She's like, Halavai, please speak to Peter. Oh my God. So to talk about the symbolism there's no other time of the year when we sit down at a meal and there is so much symbolism. We have symbolism. We have this simanim on Rosh Hashanah, but those are like one and done. But the symbolism that stays on the table the entire time, and probably like most people, if we have 2 Sedarim, it sits there all day and it sits there all the way till the next Seder, till we set the table again, right? It's just there. It's always there. So you have to ask yourself, like, why do we have this thing there? It's just a plate with some stuff on it, but Judaism is not a plate with stuff on it. This represents sort of everything that we have, the good and the bad, and we take it and we hold it and we pick it up and we cover it. Like, that's really sort of the collective experience that we have. So I think it's a great starter piece. It's wonderful, and I'll say this again and again, that you could probably clean one less closet or spend an hour on one less closet and then put together some thoughts and have something to present at the Seder. I promise you'll be better off for it. It's important to be prepared. And by the way, if you know that you have people that will be at your Seder who are capable of delivering a Dvar Torah, ask them in advance. And if they don't want to, then give them something, present them with something in advance that they can use. Have some sort of stimulating questions, perhaps. And that's just a way to make your Seder more meaningful, and to get everybody involved is the key. And if you can work it out in advance, just like we plan our seating, we have seating cards, you can also have sort of a schedule of who's going to do what and who's going to do what when. I think that's really, really important. Seder represents order, and order is done by organization, it's done by planning, it's done by a lot of advanced legwork. So if you have the ability to do so, you certainly should, and I would highly, highly recommend it. So I'm going to just take the next piece from, also this is from Rav Millstone, and kind of a similar theme. Can it be from Rosh Chodesh? Now let's be honest that when we get to certain parts of Magid, it gets boring, and people start to get cranky because like the one piece of vegetable that you had and the 2 cups of wine start to kick in, and you're kind of like flying high, like what's going on? And you know that the one day that there's nothing to eat is Erev Pesach. You can't eat chametz, you can't eat matzah, what's to eat? So everybody's just kind of cranky. So I would recommend also moving expeditiously, and I don't mean running through it, but I mean spending the right time on the right parts, and it's not parts that are sort of a low
media market.
I would ask people to you could say, okay, read it together or not, or say, here, let's continue on page in 5 minutes. Let's continue on page 36. We'll pick it up at the 10 plate, something like that. If there's nothing that's really meaningful that's going to happen at your Seder at that moment. So in this section of the Haggadah, we learn that the evening's proceedings should be performed with matzah and maror on the table. If we understand matzah to symbolize freedom, it is clear why it should be on the table all evening. But why maror? Why do we have to have maror on the table? Quotes Rav Hirsch. It's available also the Rav Hirsch Haggadah. It's a small purple Haggadah. It's about yay big, very, very, very rich in content. Rav Hirsch has some thought-provoking comments from Rav Hirsch Haggadah. Not just in Egypt, but again and again, as the Jews' destiny unfolds, they will taste the bitterness of life which served to bring about the regeneration of their forefathers. One must set his heart on the lofty goal of redemption, and then he will learn to endure all the suffering which must accompany him. Indeed, was ordained to accompany him during this waiting period before the redemption. One must remember, however, that no matter how bitter one may find the present, the bitterness his ancestors experienced will make it his troubles seem insignificant. So this is a tried and true Jewish method of, you think you have it bad, oh, you should have seen how to walk uphill to school both ways, in the snow, barefoot, etc. But of course, we have the show and narrative, which is extremely powerful, certainly at our Siddharim, because it's something that we could still relate to. And while we have people to talk about it, it's really important. For years and years, I've been bugging Mr. Eckstein to talk on Yom HaShoah, and he never likes to tell his story. And this year, I must have gotten in his good graces, and I asked him again, and he said, yes, he'll do it. And he said, there's nobody left to tell the story. I have to tell the story. I have to speak to people about it. And that's the notion that we have. So this resonates a lot. So Rav Millstone was very much influenced by the Shoah narrative and, of course, the Zionist narrative. Anyone who's ever had any affiliation with Midrashet Harova, like if your daughter comes out of there and does not want to make Aliyah, it's like you failed. So my daughter wants to make Aliyah, so I guess she did okay. But the whole notion of understanding our most recent history, where we came from and where we are, and to see the miracles of the state of Israel is something that's very, very prominent in all of his writing and all of his speaking. So at this juncture, I feel compelled to pause. Immediately upon reading the last sentence, I remember a comment Rav Kalonymus comment of Piasetzna. So this is the what's known as the Eish Kodesh, Piasetzna Rav, Piasetzna Rebbe. He was, again, a Rav Kalonymus comment, and he wrote, they recorded all of his lectures that he gave in the Warsaw Ghetto. He perished in the Shoah, Hashem Yechim Damav, but somehow they were able to, after the war, dig up his writings, and they found them, they brought them to Israel. Actually, like Rabbi Lau talks about when he first saw the cover page, and when they dug up his writings, and they've since published them, and that's why it's called Eish Kodesh, the holy fire. There is a shul in Woodmere, New York, in the Heilige Five Towns, known as Eish Kodesh, which is founded on these principles. And the Rav Weinberger, espouses these values, and it's a very big part of their whole sort of Weltanschauung in that shul. So anyway, this is written in the Sicha de Chanukah, January 1942, and they're all dated. It's amazing. And it's been translated in English. It's really, so there's a book that's called Sacred Fire that delves into the writings of the Piasetzner. And he also wrote something called Chavas HaTalmidim, a Musar book. So 6 months before Treblinka, so we talk about Treblinka were, I think it was something like almost 1 million Jews were murdered in a year in Treblinka. And that's just an astounding number, just to even think about it. But in the midst of rumors regarding the gassing of Jews at Chalmah, the Rebbe says that the suffering of Am Yisrael at the time is unprecedented in Jewish history. The Murrah of the Holocaust, testifies the Rebbe, well before the full extent of the Holocaust was known or had even occurred. So again, they're talking about 1942. Obviously, we know what happens in the 3 years following. He says, this bitterness surpasses everything and anything we have ever experienced. So Rav Hirsch said that, whatever we have, it was always worse in Mitzrayim. So the PSS says, no, this is the worst. So who's right? So Rav Milson says that this is, of course, no contradiction to Rav Hirsch. On the contrary, our troubles truly are insignificant compared both to Egypt and to World War II Europe. All of our greats, from Avram Avinu onwards, were purified in the crucible of suffering, called the Kur HaBarzel, tested in the melting pot of adversity. One must recognize that if not for the bitter herbs, the children of Israel would not have merited the Pesach sacrifice. Every deliverance is preceded by bitter birth pangs. Similar to when we say on the end of Kinnus on Tisha B'Av, the last Kinnah, when we stand up, we say Eli Tzion Yara, and we compare it to a woman who's about to give birth. And we say that, she has tremendous pain in childbirth, but we know that there's a good outcome, God willing. But the pain is only temporary. So Reb Shimon Bar Yochai said, the Holy One, blessed be He, gave Israel 3 precious gifts, and all were given through suffering. Gemara and Brachas. Torah, but only those hearts and souls purified in the crucible of suffering were fit to receive it. Israel, He gave them the land of Israel, but they had to cross the desert first, and He gave them the world to come, Olam Haba, which one only merits through struggling in this world. Indeed, Torah and mitzvahs highlight the goal and illuminate the path. However, to follow the path that leads to that goal, one must be kept on track through reproofs and instruction. During Korach, the maror is combined with the Karban Pesach and the matzah. Rav Hirsch continues. The Pesach instructs us that there is an ever-watchful guardian, shepherd and judge, who is involved in the world. Shomer Yisrael. Think of the 121st parak of Tehillim. As God distinguished in the last plague in Egypt between the evil oppressors and their slaves. The Pesach, meaning the Karban Pesach, also represents the importance of family, communal and national life, all based on justice, loving kindness, and holiness. Because the Pesach, first of all, you could not have it alone. The Karban Pesach had to be done with groups. Matzah, a simple food made of just water and flour, teaches one to divest himself of all haughtiness and its pleasures, activities, and acquisitions. All we need are the basics, food and water. And the food is bread and water, flour and water. Only the maror, or the bitter hours of trial in one's own life, can demonstrate to the individual that God is his personal guardian, shepherd, and judge. Only in periods of bitterness does one actually learn to appreciate the precious value of a pure family, communal, and national life. Only through the crucible of maror does one acknowledge his helplessness and lack of independence, and only there does he turn to cast his burden to God. Therefore, it is only through the power of maror that the truths symbolized by Pesach and Matzah are realized for the individual. Only through tasting the bitterness can we taste the sweetness. Therefore, Hillel will combine the Paschal lamb, matzah, and maror and eat them together. So this is a great thing, right? It's the end of Magid. We've already started the matzah. And to take a moment and say, I want to get to the meal, I want to get to the meal, I want to get to the soup's going to burn, whatever it might be. But to say, what? Think of it in our family, what we've experienced, that the matzah and the maror, think of the bitterness that we've had to go through, and look at what we have today. And we wouldn't have it if not for the bitterness. And it's a very big part of who we are. And you need to appreciate the goodness that we have. So in explaining the inclusion of maror in the celebratory evening, Rav Hirsch describes the benefit that we, both as individuals, as a nation, can derive from the bitterness of life. Now, again, I'm not saying that we should be sort of like a Debbie Downer here, but we do have to acknowledge the trials and tribulations. And for every family and for every person, it's different. Not everybody has the Holocaust narrative, for instance. Not everybody, some people have just been on easy street their whole life. So it makes it a little bit more challenging. Something I'm thinking about a lot, we had we had a Levaya on Sunday, and Martha Klein, who was Suzanne Berger's mother, Aleha Shalom, lived such an incredible life. And I had the opportunity to know her. And she would have been 100 years old in August. And she was born in Romania and then lived in Hungary. And she was in 3 different camps, and, miracle after miracle, how she survived the camps. And her husband, miracle after miracle, how he survived. He actually had a wife and children who were murdered. And through a family connection in Hungary, they got married. And, you talk about the cruelty of life, or the unfairness of life, is that they came in 1947 to America. He was a moil, he was a shochet, and they settled in Norwich, Connecticut. Now, I know Norwich, Connecticut because I drove to Norwich, Connecticut for the burial, which is really far away. Imagine going to Mohegan Sun. That's how far away it is. It's like 3.5 hours away. You're basically almost in Providence, Rhode Island. And in that time, in 1947, in the cemetery is so old, they hardly ever have burials there. But the cemetery, to have the Rav of the cemetery, his name was Rabbi Rosenberg, I think his name was. He died in 1950, and he was the rabbi there for 42 years. It's actually it's a small, tiny cemetery, but the centerpiece of the cemetery is this big matzeva. It almost looks like a mausoleum, and this big tribute to the Rav. Imagine being a rabbi in Norwich, Connecticut in 1900. So Suzanne's father, and he was a shochet, and he used to travel like to New Haven. He would go an hour each way. It took about an hour past New Haven. He would go and he would make sure they had kosher food, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But he suffered so much in the camps that he had illness, and he died in his 30s. So imagine that you finally survive the war, and you get married, and you have a family, and they were married only 11 years. Suzanne was 5 years old when her father died, and her sister was almost 9 years old. She was 8.5 years old when her father died. And her mom, Martha, Zichrona Livracha, she never wanted to remarry. Imagine being a single mom at that period, like just about 1960, to be a single mom and have to provide. And she managed, and she raised them, and they both went to Barnard, and they graduated, and they raised beautiful families. Kanai Nahara, when she died, she had 36 great-grandchildren. From 2 daughters, 36 great-grandchildren. And what an unbelievable tribute. And by the way, she was an unbelievably positive person. She always spoke about her husband like as if he had died yesterday. That's how close she felt to him. That's why she never wanted to remarry. And she had such emunah. She was always davening and always with the Tehillim. And she talked about how God is good to her. Can you imagine somebody like that saying, God is good to me? And we would look like, what? Where's the fairness? But she spoke about how God is good to me. And I had the ability to know her and to learn from her and to be inspired by her. And then what struck me, when I'm reading off the names, she always used to call her children and her grandchildren. She said, God bless me with such a beautiful garden. And my garden is growing. That was the term that she always used. And from this one person had such a beautiful garden. Think about all the gardens that we were robbed of. Let's think about that. All the people, the 6 million people that were murdered, imagine what they could have produced. Imagine what we could have been. Imagine what was taken from us. It's hard to fathom even. It's hard to fathom those that were taken. Imagine though the future generations that were taken. So that's the matzah and the morah, and that's something that we think about in our lives. And how do we say, well, let's look at the blessing that we have in our lives then. And maybe that's why Korach comes at the very end of Magid, right after we're in between Hallel portions. We started the Hallel, we didn't finish the Hallel, we have to eat. Look at the bounty that we have. Look at this beautiful meal. Look how lucky we are. But it becomes because we stand on the shoulders of giants, and those who gave so much before us. I think it's such a very, very powerful piece of something that we have to look at in the Seder, and especially when we discuss sort of the narrative of our families. One of the things that I hope that they'll bring it home to you, so that, and I can give you like a sneak peek for next Tuesday, which for the men's club. But one of the things that I'm presenting is Bruce Feiler wrote a bunch of books. All his books are great. So in his book about how to raise a successful family, so one of the things that is an exercise in there, and that is that for your family to write a mission statement. Think about it. We write a mission statement for our synagogue. We write it for our school. We write it for organizations. Does your family have a mission statement? And there's a whole formula how to go about doing that. And it's a wonderful thing to think about. And that's what the Seder night is about. Of saying, what is the goal of our family? What do we stand for? Now, I understand families are big and diverse, et cetera. Maybe you want to do it with just your immediate family, or maybe you want to do it just with your spouse. I don't know, but it's complicated, but it's something that's worth thinking about. All right, so I have the next item is from the Ksaf Sofer. Let me blow this up a little bit so I can see it, because at his certain age, I can't read anymore. Kol hamarbe l'saper b'yitzias Mitzrayim harei zeh meshubach. This we say it at the beginning after Avodim Hayinu that I know we have to talk. The more one talks about it, the greater praise that one gets. Now, there are some people that take this a little too seriously, and they think that you have to spend 4 hours on this paragraph before you get anywhere. Because by us, the Seder starts. I don't know. It's going to start 8 o'clock, right? We start at nightfall, and you're going to be sitting down to eat dinner at 11. You have to be realistic. You have to know who's at the table. You have to know your audience. I say that all the time. Know your audience. If you have an audience that is not so learned or not so affiliated, and you're trying to inspire them and show them the beauty of Judaism, it's not the time to break out the binders with the shiur that you learned in seminary or in yeshiva and to sit for 4 hours. I made that mistake when I was younger, and I thought that people genuinely wanted to listen to me. My parents were just being nice to me, but they don't want to hear that. You want something that's meaningful, that's going to be impactful, not something that's going to just be boring. When people start like asking for a 5th cup of wine when you haven't even got to the 2nd cup of wine, that's usually a sign that you're in trouble. Okay. So Kol Hamarba, we say that whoever speaks more about the Exodus is Harei zeh meshubach. So he quotes from the Gemara in Shabbos, Kol hakore halal b'chol yom, harei zeh mecharef u'megadef. The Gemara says that someone who says halal every single day is considered a blasphemer. So he says, Hu Temua. This is the Ksav Sofer, the son of the Chassam Sofer. He says, this doesn't make sense. What's so bad about saying halal? It should be a good thing to say halal. V'nirali, hine halal shanu omrim yusan muzukan alanisim shas Hashem lanu im tzeisenim mitzrayim. He says the halal that we say, and by the way, the foundation of halal, what we say whenever we say halal, b'tzeis Yisrael mitzrayim, etc., is founded on the miracles that God did for us when we left Egypt. Ukriyas Yamsuf and the splitting of the sea, right? V'hei manisim shelo b'derech hateva. These are what we would call supernatural occurrences. These are truly miraculous events. Aval onu tzrichen lahodos laHashem al kol dag melohi she'osa lona b'chol yom vayom. He says, however, we're required to give halal and thanks on every kindness that God does for us each and every day. Hashem zan umefarnes l'chulanu. God, He feeds us, He supports us. In other words, we have the ability to take care of ourselves. V'yisponein adam ki lo lechachamim lechem v'lo lechvod osher v'akol b'dei shemayim rek ein lismach al hanes. We can't rely on a miracle. We have to go through all of our efforts. V'tzarech ha'adam la'asos ma shebi'ichalasa b'derech hateva. And a person has to make every effort. You have to get an education, and you have to go out and work, and you have to struggle, right? Without that, we wouldn't get anywhere. So what the point is what the Gemara means is that if you say halal every day, if all you're going to do is say halal over the supernatural things, if you're only going to thank God for the incredible, then you're not going to appreciate what we would call the normal, or what we would call teva, what we would call the natural. So, and you've heard me say this a million times, the most important blessing that you could say every single day is Asher Yatzar. The first thing we say in the morning, Modeh ani lefanecha. It's going to be a focus of our Shabbos Hagaddah this year, about giving thanks. Modeh ani lefanecha is that we don't, if you only care about the miracles, then you forget about the real miracles. And what are the real miracles? The real miracles are everyday life. The fact that I can go from point A to point B and be out of harm's way. The fact that I can wake up and I can be healthy. The fact that I can go to the store and buy food. The fact that I have a job that allows me to afford to go, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That we never want to lose sight. That's why the Gemara says that if a person says halal every day, it doesn't mean you shouldn't give thanks every day. It just means if you give only halal, which is based on supernatural miracles, if you say that every day, then everyday life loses its meaning. So therefore, this is an opportunity for us to appreciate. And it's a good thing to go around the table and say, this is the original Thanksgiving, by the way. The Seder is Thanksgiving. Go around and say, tell me one thing. And again, if you have someone who's less affiliated, someone who's less in tune sort of with the Pesach ideas, everybody can identify with being thankful and saying, where's something that, you never thought it was going to happen, but it happened, or where's something that you can really appreciate what it means. The last thing I want to share with you, and this is important. This I give credit to my friend. He's a rabbi in West Hartford, Rabbi Tuvia Brander. He drew this to my attention. Let's make this a little smaller. Okay. And this is from Colonimus Kalman Epstein. See, we only do Colonimus Kalmans today. So a lot of times those names go together, Colonimus Kalman. And it's called Ma'arva Shemesh. And here, it's an interesting thing to talk about the way we talk, Jewish speech. So Jews talk a certain way, right? So for instance, Jews, when we refer, American Jews, I don't know if you say Orthodox, whatever, but when we refer to a highway, for some reason, we always have to insert the in front of it. How do you get there? You take the 95, you take the 280, and then you take the 80, right? That's how Jews, or we never have lunch with someone. We never have lunch at someone's house. We have lunch by someone. Where are you for Shabbos? Oh, are you going to be by me? Or are you going to be by you? Oh, you by me? Okay, good. You're by me. So certain ways that we talk, you could very easily identify someone who is Jewish. Or Jews also, they don't get haircuts. We take haircuts. I have to go take a haircut. I don't know where you're taking it, but you have to take a haircut. Okay. So v'yira b'zeh al pi ma'amer Chazal, that we have this famous statement of Chazal that b'zechus gimel devarim nigalu Mitzrayim. There are three things that allow the Jewish people to be redeemed from Egypt. One, shaloshinu es shemam, veloshinu es lashonam, and the last one is a different version, loshinu es malbusham. They didn't change their names. They didn't change their language. They spoke Lashon HaKodesh. They spoke Jewish, and they dressed Jewish. Now we always look, oh wow, look at that. I mean, slavery, and they kept their language. That's amazing. The way my Rebbe always explained it to me was the reason why God had to take them out is because that's all they had left. There was nothing else that you could differentiate and discern who was Jewish and who wasn't. The only thing they had was maybe some shmatas and maybe a couple of words they used and maybe their names. But other than that, they were about as assimilated as they come. He says, what's the big deal that they didn't change their names or their language? How could you speak Lashon HaKodesh always? Halo bein am Lashon Acheres, he's Goru, asher lo hevinu Lashon HaKodesh, v'hayu mechrochen ledaber imam b'Lashonam. Even the most insular communities that we know that exist today, they still have to function in society in America, and they have to speak the language of the country. They may not do it well, they may not do it often, but they have to know. How is it possible if they're living and they're interdispersed in the Egyptian society that they could speak Lashon HaKodesh? They have to speak Egyptian. Also, what's the big deal? So are we speaking Lashon HaKodesh right now? No, I'm speaking Lashon English. We call it Lashon Amzar. When Rashi in Chumash, often when he quotes his French words, he always writes Belaz. He gives you the French word Belaz. Belaz means Belashon Amzar, in the language of a strange nation. But he uses it. He says, Gamar Chazal Sharisham Eni Yodon Meshimam Bekever. Vizet Tamaboy. Madua Enim Yodim Shemam. Lavar calls. He says, like, what's a big deal? You know the names. Nobody remembers your name anyway. He says, Lavar calls that near Al Pi Mamar Chazal. Ad Shatam Ispalel Shichnisu B'cha Divrei Torah. Hispalel Shalichnisu B'cha Macholas Azuras. The Gemara, the Chazal teach us that before you daven about, what Torah you're going to learn, be careful about what goes into your mouth. V'ha'inyan ki hinei kol minei diburim mikol minei lashonos kulam hem aidei tzrufei hachaf beis osios haTorah hakshur ma'Hashem motzas hapeh she'ev shar l'daber shum diber ba'olam rak aidei osan hachaf beis osios. There's a certain amount of letters in the world, and whatever language you have, it's combined from those letters of the alphabet. And it's all godly inspired, ultimately from the alphabet. And he says those 22 osios v'nikudoseim shem osios torosenu hakadosha. He says, and they all stem originally from holiness from God. Lachen kesha adam shomer piv l'shono He says, when a person watches his mouth, what comes out of your mouth, what goes into your mouth, what you eat, what you don't eat. And a person is careful to tell the truth and not to tell lies. And to speak lashon hara. Or to just make fun of everybody. Then you have a holy mouth. Your language, your mouth, it's all holy. Now he says this is not like under the Satan, for whatever that means. It's very Hasidic kind of thought. Like Kabbalistic Zohar type of thought. There's this evil force in the world. So he goes on to say, I'm not going to go through the whole thing here, but the whole notion, what is Lashon HaKodesh? Lashon HaKodesh is not just speaking the actual language of Hebrew or Lashon, but it's how we use whatever language that we speak. In what context do we use it? Do we speak properly? Do we speak nicely of others? Do we speak kindly about others? Do we make sure that what we put in our mouths and what comes out of our mouth are holy? So therefore, you could speak English, you could not know a word of Hebrew, says Rav Kalonimus Kalman, and you could still speak Lashon HaKodesh, because if you speak truth, if you speak kindly, if you don't speak Lashon Hara, if you don't speak evil of others, if you make sure that we eat kosher things and we say kosher things, that's also Lashon HaKodesh. And therefore, this is an opportunity at the Seder. You know what happens? It always happens, is that at the Seder, we have family and we have friends. And when there's family and friends together, we have to talk about the other family and friends. It's inevitable. It's going to happen. Who's here, who's not here, who we like, who we don't like. So it's an opportunity to say, you know what? How about if this is what kept the Jewish people alive and merited their geula, why don't we make an effort at our Seder table to have Lashon HaKodesh? Let's make an effort to have pure speech. Let's leave the gossip for another time. Let's talk about the beauty of our family. Let's talk about the history of our family. Let's talk about the meaning of our family. Let's talk about the mission of our family. And if we could do that, we will have a very, very meaningful Seder. Again, the key is always going to be, you have to know your audience. You have to prepare them beforehand, because nothing is going to happen on its own. And sometimes it falls solely in your hands because you're not doing everything else also. You have to prepare all the beautiful meals, and you have to do all the shopping and all the cleaning and everything. And sometimes this falls on you as well, and whether it's fair or not, but you have the capability to make your Siddurim beautiful. So I hope this is helpful to you, and I know it certainly is helpful to me. And we should, God willing, we'll have time next week to do a little bit more, I hope, if everybody's up for it. And maybe the following Tuesday, I don't know, might be a little too close, we'll see. But certainly next week, God willing, we'll be able to learn some more. And if anybody has any nice ideas that you would like to share, please, by all means, let me know. And we could put you on stage like we did last year. I'm not going to ask everybody to do it, because it, like once every few years is enough. But if anybody would like to share something, by all means, please do let me know. And I'll be happy. Like we say, we learn, we learn from many, many different people. And that's the beauty of our thing. So again, I hope everybody has a great day. And
Thank you.
Yeah, good, great. And I'll speak to Peter. You just tell him.
Okay, I will.
Please do. Okay.
I will. Thank you.
For this, I could be his rabbi.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
For this in the marathon. Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you very much, Rabbi.
Thank you.